Thank you very much for joining us. I am thrilled to be chairing this event for the Primadonna Festival with Sharon Kendrick and Dorothy Koomson, who've both joined me. Before I introduce them, I want to tell you a little bit about Primadonna. Primadonna was set up by 16 women, and our vision is to create the world as we want to see it. So we feel as Primadonnas that the world needs better conversations about the things that we as women want to have. We're not female exclusive, everyone is welcome. The whole point is we want to have some of the conversations that don't get to happen elsewhere. What's really important with Primadonna is we create space for all of us to have the conversations that we can enjoy. And today I am thrilled that we can talk about one of my favourite subjects, which is commercial fiction. Books that are read by millions of women, not only here in the UK, but across the globe. And so I'm hoping that we can find out a little bit more about Dorothy and Sharon, how they write, why they write, when they write, what they write. And actually, what I most hope is that I inspire through this at least one person to read both of your books, because I know you're brilliant writers, and I know that everyone can find something to enjoy in what you write. And really, I just want to sell more books, please. So that's my mission. First of all, let me introduce Dorothy. Dorothy is known as Britain's best-selling commercial fiction author. She's sold over 2 million books already. We'd like it to be 20 million, please, though, so can everyone get buying. Any bookshops are fine, supermarkets also, any format. Dorothy is about to publish her 16th book in July. We're actually filming in June, but we'll be sharing this in August, so it will be available in all good bookshops. And Sharon is also a best-selling novelist. Sharon has written over 100 novels for Mills Boon. She's sold over 27 million books, and she delights readers. Well, I think something like one Mills Boon is sold every 4 seconds is what we say in the UK. I should declare an interest. I am the UK's executive publisher for Mills Boon. I will not be showing any preferential treatment during this interview because that's not how I operate, but I just want to reassure everybody. Ladies, please, can I start by asking you what made you first want to become a novelist? And may I start with you, Dorothy?
Well, I love reading. I've always been a reader. Our house was very much a reading household. We didn't have much money growing up, so we used to go to the library a lot. So I really love an affinity for libraries, and I hate the fact that they've been closed. I always had to put my pitch in for libraries because they're amazing places. When I was about 13, I decided I was going to try and write a book, and obviously started writing them in my exercise books. I remember when my dad and my mum used to come to events, I'd have to kind of like, even though I was an adult, I had to kind of gloss over that because they thought I was doing homework, and I was. But I was also writing these stories that set in America where I'd never been to. And I just love making things up, I should say. And so I've done that all my life, really. I love going off into fantasy worlds, and anything I see, I will turn into a story. You know, my neighbours, they've all got, I mean, I know my neighbours quite well now, but before I knew them, the lives they were leading, you would not believe, they wouldn't believe either. Yeah, so I love making things up. That's what I do.
So age 13, you started writing your first novel. I think that was the same for you, wasn't it, Sharon?
Yeah, well, I loved reading as well. I was an only child growing up in a house virtually underneath the flight path at Heathrow Airport. And I was on my own a lot, so I used to get lost in my own imagination. We didn't have a single book in the house apart from one on ballet that I had. So I too went to the library and have a great affinity to the library. And Dorothy, it's just so weird because I used to write in my exercise book as well. And I wrote a first book when I think I was about 12 called Nothing Else Matters. It featured identical twins at boarding schools, heavily influenced by Enid Blyton. And then I used to write this one in my general book, and I actually it was like a magazine in my general book called, rather unoriginally, Generali, and the adventures of Edith, this poor girl called Edith who was very poor, and she used to wear size 10 army boots because they're the only one. I used to pass Generali around the class, and then I got quite bored, so I started up a rival to Generali called Rivalali, and that was it really. I just loved writing. I've always told stories, and left school at 16. So, you know, because people are always saying to me, oh, so what did you read at university? And I sort of saying, well, I didn't actually go. I went to secretarial college for a year and learned to type, which has actually been the best skill I've ever learned, to touch type. And or they say, did you do journalism? So it's actually, I think it's important that, if you love something and you're passionate about it and you hone your craft, you don't have to go through the traditional channels to become a writer, And
actually, talking of traditional channels to become a writer, I'd love to know how you both first got published. Tell me the story of how that happened.
My story is, I've told it so many times now, I'm sure everyone's actually bored of hearing it.
I don't know.
Well, I had this idea. I was writing the book that became my second novel, The Chocolate Run. I went to visit my friend in Leeds and we were on a night out, and she's married with 2 older children, older than me. And all these men kept coming up to her and buying her drinks, trying to give her a phone number. And I was sat going, I'm single, I'm young, No one paid any attention to me whatsoever. And the next morning, she got very hungover. She got very drunk and very hungover, and I had no sympathy. So the next morning, she woke up and she was like, that was your fault. You made those men buy me drinks, and that's never happened to me in my life. And I thought, oh, that's a great idea for a story. Someone who's like modern day Cupid, who makes other people fall in love, but also follow their heart. So I came back to London and I wrote the first 3 chapters of The Cupid Effect and sent it off to agents, and they all rejected me, every single one of them. So I sat down and I wrote it again. I wrote the whole thing and I thought, I believe in this story, so I'm going to carry on. So I sent it off again and got rejected by everybody again. I mean, literally everybody in the book just went, no. So I thought I'd send it to a small publisher, a small independent publisher called Piatkas, and didn't hear anything back for 3 months. And by this point, I'd sort of decided, I was thinking, should I give up trying to get published? I mean, I can't give up writing because that's what I do, but should I give up trying to get published? And I was lying in bed sort of thinking, I need a sign. Should I carry on trying to get published or should I just give it up? And then I was knocking on the door and the postman had this package for me. And I used to review books for New Woman magazine. So I sort of slung this package and I thought, well, actually, I sent my book to them, so maybe I should have a look and see. And it was an offer for a 2-book deal. So that's how I got published. And obviously, I thought, as we all do, wrongly, that I would have to give up my job and stay at home and write all the time. And that wasn't the case. And you know what? I'm glad it wasn't the case. I'm glad I still had to get up every morning and go to work, because it keeps you grounded, doesn't it? It reminds you that the people who buy your books, they go to work and they work really hard for their money. So I have to work really hard to make sure it's the best book I can write at that time.
I love that story. So everyone who said no, then did they come knocking on your door?
Oh no! What? The second part 2 of my story is I had 2 books published with Piatkas, and then I decided to move on, and I changed agents as well. I didn't say how I got my agent. I got my agent because I had this offer from Piatkas, and I rang up one of the agents who hadn't been too horrible to me, and she'd said I was trying too hard to be funny. So if I ever decided to rewrite my book, she'd have a look at it again. And so when I spoke to her, she kept laughing. And I said to her, see, I am funny. So she said to me, would you like me to be your agent? And I said, well, yes. So she was my agent for those first 2 books. And then I decided I wanted to write something different. And so we parted ways. And I found a new agent on the strength of the beginning of this one, My Best Friend's Girl. So I sent off a chunk of that to him. And he became my agent, and he sent it to all the publishers. And I was rejected again by pretty much everybody, apart from one publisher who decided to take a chance on me. And from that, My Best Friend's Girl went on to sell loads and be on the number 2 on the bestseller list, translated into 30 languages, and won an award. So every day I go, ha, remember when you didn't want me?
Yes.
I don't at all, actually. I don't at all. I say that all the time. I don't at all think about it.
And actually, Sharon, I know that you have a slightly different entry into this world. So tell us your story and then we'll do a compare and contrast.
I had 2 children very close together, 17-month gap. So all the day I was looking after them. When they'd gone to bed in the evening, I used to sit down at my typewriter and I started writing this story. The first book I wrote was about a woman who'd had an evil partner who was a barrister, and a friend of mine who knew law said, this is crap, that's not what a barrister would do. I just remember that number 1 rule of writing, write about what you know. And so I'd been a nurse and I was married to a doctor at the time, and I'd been to Australia. So I sat down and I wrote this book called Nurse in the Outback. The first line was, so you've come to Australia looking for a husband, have you? And anyway, so then I sent it off to Mills and Boon. And I mean, I know that this isn't usual. I know it was beginner's luck because it hasn't been like that since, but they just accepted the manuscript as it was without a single change and invited me for lunch. And like Dorothy, I immediately just thought, oh my God, a check's going to come through the door. That's it. I'm going to be off on this kind of cruise. But, I wrote the first book and then the second book, and, the second book needed changes, and, and I learned about revisions, which of course is quite difficult actually, as a template, if you've had your first one and you didn't have to do any changes. So I was actually thinking, bloody hell, what do you mean? You don't like that part. But then you realise that actually, that the editorial input is what polishes the book and makes it glitter.
So for both of you, it was passion to write. It was life's dream. You got published. You got that first deal. You both thought, that's it, made it. I'm now an author. But both of you had full-time jobs. Both of you were doing other things. At what point did you realise that being an author could be your job?
For me, because I was single for a long time, and I'm not saying that in any way that I'm upset about, I have lived my life, how I've lived my life, but I was always on my own. So I had to pay my mortgage and travel and food and stuff. So I've always needed to be financially stable. So even when my best friend's girl did fantastically well, I still wasn't going to give up my full-time job because I needed to make sure that I knew that I was financially secure. So, and that's what I say to people all the time. You want to give up your job, do it. Only if you know that you can afford to live on what you're going to earn. Because, if your book doesn't do well, then you're kind of waiting on something that's not going to arrive. So I knew I was an author. It was my occupation, but it was still something that I had to do as well as something else to pay the bills. And a lot of authors do, in this day and age, there are very few authors who are just full-time authors. They have to do other jobs,
I think the average earning for an author is in the UK is something like £6,000, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. It's shockingly low. When people do pirate books and stuff, and they do kind of expect stuff for free, books for free, you kind of want to go to them, do you know what I have to go through to earn even the smallest amount of money to write a book in the first place? So you're actually stealing money from me. And you're stealing my livelihood, and you're stealing the chance for the next book to be published as well. So for me, it took a while before I kind of gave up being a journalist and working in magazines and newspapers and writing articles and editing and getting on that train and going and sitting down and editing someone else's work. It took ages before I would let it go because I wasn't in a position to become financially destitute because I was writing books.
Yeah, and actually we know really that we hear stories about people getting these amazing sums for books, but literally they are very few and far between, as we know, and they're the ones that get reported, and everyone else is writing books around full-time jobs, caring for children, caring for others. I think people assume that the writer's life is this lovely, wonderful, privileged life where you have a beautiful study and actually that you get to do what you want all day and you don't have all of those worries about the gas bill or, any of the day-to-day stuff. Sharon, what was it like for you, kind of that starting out in the business?
Things were a bit different then. So I had 2 children and I was looking after them full time, and I realised that I was fortunate because I was married and someone else was paying the mortgage. But I used to kind of fit the writing in when the kids were, like, first of all, when they used to go to playgroup in the afternoon and then, at the beginning in the evenings. So I was writing doctor-nurse romances, and then I realised that I wanted a bigger market, basically. So I wanted to write contemporary books. And I was just thinking about what Dorothy was saying at the beginning about how, she just kept going and just kept going and going, because I wrote 3 contemporary books after my medical ones, all of which were rejected outright. So that was like, rejection's really hard for anyone, but I think we authors are a very sort of sensitive creature. It was hard. And then the 4th one was published, but it needed like 4 lots of revisions, and then it was published. And I can remember saying to one of the editors that she'd asked me to speak to the sales group, and I told that story, and I said, oh my God, that probably sounds really arrogant, doesn't it? I just kept going. And she said, no, that's the one thing about writers, they have a real belief in themselves and their story, because you have to really, because otherwise you just come up with stuff along the way. Then I carried on writing contemporaries and stuff, and then I got divorced. Obviously then it was different, and I just carried on. And then I was approached by someone from Curtis Brown, actually a big agent, who wanted me to write mainstream, and it was almost like being in a film. People kept saying, oh, we want you to write this, because all my life, my writing life, people have said, oh, have you ever thought of writing a proper book, a real book? And lots of people and my friends, they thought I was mad because I I wasn't interested. I love writing romance. I love the experience of just, like a whole love life and a whole story and a whole kind of hope for the future all in this book. And actually, I'm really glad, because I think I could have burnt myself out, whereas I'm still as passionate about it today. And as Dorothy's like, got this one out, it's coming out next month. It's a very, very, very hot hero, but a very surprising hero. But I won't give any spoilers.
But I think what you're both doing is you're giving readers that chance to escape. What you're both creating, and we've used the word fantasy a little bit, but you're creating that pitch perfect escapism where your readers can just get away from that pressure of the day-to-day and live in a world where they don't have to worry about putting the washing on or going to the shops or going to work or doing their jobs or meeting deadlines. So when you're writing, do you have somebody in mind? Are you thinking about your reader? How does that work for you?
My romances are kind of twisted. Have you not read the later ones where the lives of people are not easy? You find out your husband's been doing all sorts of things, and you find out your wife has had this double life. Yeah, no, it's not. They're not true escapism in that sense of the word. But I found very quickly that I needed to write books that I would read. When I started writing, there were very few books that starred women like me, who looked like me, or who had life experiences like me. I mean, black women, they were not the stars. We were not the stars of these books. That's why I started writing books, because one of the reasons I wanted to write books was I wanted to be the star of a book. I wanted to pick up a book and have the main character who looked like me, and she had all these crazy experiences, and it wasn't literary books. I love literary books. I love books that are serious and have beautiful flowery language and are clever and stuff. But I also like reading commercial stuff. Commercial stuff's where my heart is. And so that's why I wrote. So I don't have anybody in particular in mind. I do know that when I'm writing a book, I have to erase what people have said about the last book from my mind, because if I stuck to writing what people loved, have said they loved, I wouldn't write anything else. I wouldn't take chances. I wouldn't have written The Ice Cream Girls, for example, after writing My Best Friend's Girl. I would have carried on doing the same thing, because, people like that and they want to see the same story again. And I can't do that. I need to try and challenge myself. I need to try and do different things. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with writing similar types of books, because everyone's different and people go to different areas of the market for different things. I write the books that I would want to read. So like I say, I don't have a reader in mind when I'm writing.
But you do have yourself as that person, which I think is really important. And what we know is there's nowhere near enough books published by Black writers or Asian writers, and that actually, particularly in commercial fiction, you have been breaking down those barriers from before you published your first novel. And we've got a lot more barriers in our way to break down yet. But
one of the things, have myself in mind, I am probably the harshest critic. So, when I've written a book and I read it back, I go back to edit it, I am really harsh on myself, much harsher than anybody else would be. So I don't know if I'm doing myself a service to really being the reader I have in mind, because I don't think some of my readers would be as harsh on myself as I am on myself.
But that's why your books are so brilliant, because you don't let them get to the readers until you're really happy.
Until they've been for the ringer with me, basically.
And who are you writing for, Sharon? Do you have a reader in mind?
Oh, no, I don't have a reader in mind. The only way I can write is when the story takes over. So when Dorothy says about being her own harshest critic, I've just delivered a book, which I'm waiting for my editor to read. Hurry up. And I cut 10,000 words. And she went, really? And the thing is, the more you write, you can write a competent story. But if the characters have reached a point where they're just going through the motions and you're not feeling it, then the story's not working. For the romantic fiction for Mills and Boon, the reader has to fall in love with a hero, and therefore I do. And so I have a kind of template, which is like Aidan Turner, who played Poldark, but only because I'm half Irish. So I find Irish men very sort of sexy, that sort of slightly buccaneering hair, maybe a bit long, but just would sing at the drop of a hat, but would be really lovely to an old lady, just that sort of powerful, sexy. So I think of him, actually.
But that's what's brilliant about fiction, because we can write the heroes and then the reader actually creates their own story, don't they? So, Dorothy, you may have been writing about your neighbours, but they wouldn't necessarily know it. But
I didn't write about my neighbours. I don't want them to watch this and start thinking I've written stories about them. I really haven't. In my head, I do that. And I've got my husband doing it as well, which is hilarious.
You both make stories up about as you're seeing things. Have you always taking notes and bringing ideas that you think might go into a novel? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And also, let's not pretend I don't get revenge on people in my books, because I do all the time. You can meet a very juicy end, as someone said to me the other day in my books, if you've wronged me. So don't wrong me. Be nice to me all the time.
hope we pass.
Of course you do. You're nice people.
I'm just thinking about, we were really lucky in Primadonna in our inaugural festival. We got lots of people who want to be authors, so people who are writing but aren't yet published. And I think understanding how you get published is really hard for people. But one of the things I'm really aware of is that you just have to keep writing. You just have to keep sending off. Like, you've both talked about the kind of the process of doing that. If you could go back in time and give yourself advice, what would you say to yourself at the start of your careers?
Well, that's quite a hard question. I suppose it's just that thing about, if you really believe in a story, then to write it. The trouble is you have to temper sort of belief with reality. So, it's no good saying to someone, if this is the book of your heart, then you go out and tell it and you keep going with it, because it might be, and it might not be right for the market at that time. And, Dorothy was saying, like, commercial fiction is the thing, it's got to sell. I suppose the best advice I was given really is read what's around, because books change all the time. I mean, particularly the line I write for, it just reflects what's going on in society. So you had books in 1908 that were sort of passionate about, whipping people off to the desert. The books during the Second World War, lauded the virtues of domesticity and loyalty and the woman waiting at home. And you can understand why. In the 60s, they became like so racy. And then you had AIDS. And of course, immediately, from being kind of like a man who really put it about, his sexiness was kind of seen as sort of the fact that he could have any woman on the planet. Obviously, he's a Mills Boon hero, but he was very fastidious and choosy. And that in its way became its own kind of inherent sexiness. So I guess the advice I'd give myself is just to have a look to see what's around, really.
Yeah, and keep going. I mean, the advice I give to people ask me often for writing advice, and, I read a lot. That's one of the things I say. You read all different things, not the genre you want to write for, but see how people are telling stories, what's selling, what's not selling, and also write. Just stop talking about it and write. We talk about it all the time. People talk about writing a book, but then they actually sit down and do it. And what Sharon said earlier on, when you said the first rule of writing, and you said that person, you showed it to someone and they said it was nonsense or whatever, it wasn't very good what barristers would do. I thought you were going to say the first rule of writing is not to show it to anybody, because people, without even realising, put you off, stop you from doing what you want to do. So, just get on with it. Rather than gauging other people's opinion on stuff, actually just sit down and do it. I said to someone the other night who'd written her first book, and she asked me what she should do with it. And one of the things I said to her was, once it's ready to send out, start writing your next book, because that could become your fourth book to be published. Publishers are looking for somebody who can write more than one book. So don't sit around waiting for this to happen before you start the next book. Almost put it out of your head, send it off, and then forget it, and then start with the next book. Because if you do get a publishing deal, hurrah, you've got a book there already in the waiting, so the publisher can see that you're capable of doing more than one book. And, if it doesn't work, you're working on something else that could work. So, don't sit around waiting for that book to do well. Get on with the next one,
Yeah, but interesting that, Dorothy, because after I did show that guy that book and he said that was rubbish, that was actually useful advice, because I was writing about something and I just would, it made me realise actually the importance of research, and now research is like one of my favourite bits.
Yes. That it was helpful to show him, and I can understand it was, but also sometimes you just need to write the crap book and get it out of the system.
Yeah, but since then, the only person I show my book is to my editor. A lot of people have critique partners, but I think you're right. One of your peers, one of your friends, someone you like, someone might read a book and just decide they don't like it. And then your ego and your confidence at the beginning is very fragile, isn't it? Because you're used to every revision, really. I know that when I send my book in now, it's as perfect as I think it can possibly be.
Yeah.
So if I get extensive revisions back, it's ridiculous. And logically, I know it's ridiculous, but emotionally, I feel terribly kind of like got at, wounded, hurt and offended. She's completely wrong. Well, she's not.
Yes, and that's the thing. And that's why when people try and ask me to read their books at an early stage, I would say no, because I don't want to be the person who tramples on your dreams, stops you from writing for 10 years. Or you've got to get to the place first before you can hear it from somebody who you respect. Your editor and your agent are the people who should be able to find a way to tell you if the book's not good enough or well written enough to do you credit.
So do you show it, because I don't have an agent, so do you show it to your agent before you send it to your editor?
I send it to my editor and my agent at the same time, and I'm quite unusual because I don't write in order. I don't like a sequence. I don't send it to my editor before the final draft. It's just, I write it and then I send it.
When you say you don't write in order, so do you have a routine for not writing in order then? Do you start at the end, or how do you do it?
I'll have scenes that come to me for a story. So I write them down. And then, like you say, research is really important. So I'll start researching whilst I'm writing down these random scenes that come into my head. And then I will keep on with the story as I'm researching and finding out more about the people and the situations and talking to more people. So sometimes it's at the end, sometimes it's the middle I start. Very rarely I start at the beginning. With the earlier books, because I was trying to get published, I did have to start at the beginning. But now I just start wherever I need to. And then I patch it all together. This notice board and another one I've got, it's usually covered in post-it notes with the scenes from the story, which I then rearrange into order. So then I go back and I sit down and I rewrite dot 1, dot 2, dot 3, dot 4. And then the final one, I put them all together into one document, and then I rewrite the whole thing so that it all flows together. And it's a lot of work, and a lot of people are horrified. Like I say, a lot of author friends are just like, oh, you can't do that, but it works for me.
It's what works for you, isn't it? And the
absolutely.
Thing is, yeah, and I'm telling the story about a man and a woman falling in love, overcoming the obstacles to their love. So for me, it is very linear because it has to be. And I know that some authors, they will write sort of a sex scene. They say, write a sex scene using, but you couldn't, because sex at the beginning of their story is going to be very different from how it is right at the end or even in the middle, and it can mean so many different things. And it's not just about the physical, obviously the enjoyment or the attraction. It's also there's loads of stuff, particularly for women. Sex means so much to them in different ways, and so I couldn't possibly write it in anything other than a linear way, because also how the heroine feels sort of towards the end of the story about anything really is going to be completely different to how and I don't know how she's going to feel because I haven't reached that point yet. But I used to teach this writing course, and one of the things I used, because sex, when it's read out, sounds, even if it's brilliantly written, even because it's taken out of context. I used to read a sex scene out, and I'd sort of say, oh, who do you think wrote this? And because everyone knew they sort of say, oh, Mills and Boon. And it was actually Ian McEwan, which actually used to make me feel very kind of triumphant, really. I love Ian McEwan. He's a great writer, but any sex read out can sort of sound weird, can't it?
Okay, I'm going to read some.
Yes, please.
The reason I'm reading this sex scene is because I got quite a few complaints from readers saying it was disgraceful and that I should think about myself and the things I do.
Wow.
And the things I write, I shouldn't be writing these things. So I'm going to read this sex scene out. I stood in front of the mirror waiting for Jack to let me know I could go ahead into the house. Instead of moving forwards, he turned, a mischievous grin taking over his face before stepping closer to me. May I smell you? He asked, his green eyes dancing as he slowly manoeuvred me backwards until I was against the wall, and he stood in front of me but wasn't touching me. Smell me? I asked, taken aback. Yes, smell you. Just your neck, if that's all right. I didn't see what harm it could do, and I had thought he was going to kiss me, but if he wanted to smell me first, then... If you must, I said. He buried his face in the nape of my neck, and suddenly, unexpectedly, I was overcome by the scent of him. His skin, slightly damp and salty, yet arid, with hints of something I couldn't place, swirled notes of a sensation up through my nose and directly into my bloodstream. All at once, I was on fire. My body was aching and longing, bubbling and effervescing with the smell of him. This scent has been driving me crazy all night, he said, oblivious to what he had ignited in me. I've been having these mix of these incredible feelings because of that smell. I was wondering if it was you, and it is. He pressed his nose closer to my neck, his body now touching mine. It definitely is. The last 3 words moved his lips over my skin, and I gasped as if in pain, pushing against the wall to steady myself. In response, he came closer, his lips still on my neck. I gasped again. He stood upright and stared down at me for a moment. You're so beautiful, he whispered. He lowered his head, his lips aiming for mine, and I closed my eyes, waiting for contact. When his lips didn't touch mine, I opened my eyes again. So beautiful, he repeated, then kissed the other side of my neck. Each kiss, soft and measured, injected more of him into me. I did not know this feeling. It was so raw. His hand moved up to my shoulders, under the lapels of my coat, pushing it onto the ground along with my bag. I was still intoxicated by his smell, the close-up of him, and didn't resist in any way. His hands skimmed down over my body, over my ankle-length blue dress. "Is this okay?" he whispered into my ear, his breath hot and laboured. "Yes," I managed to push out between my own laboured breaths. "Do you want me to stop?" he asked. "Yes," I said in my head. Yes, stop. Please stop." I hardly knew the man, but he seemed to know me intimately. He knew where to touch, where to kiss, how to fill my senses. I knew I shouldn't be doing this, but "No, don't stop," I whispered. "Don't stop." "I have to taste you," he said, pulling away. His dark emerald green eyes searched mine for a few seconds, looking for protest. "I have to taste you," he repeated. Then he was on his knees, lifting my dress, tugging down my black knickers until they were around my ankles. Automatically, I stepped out of them, and he immediately pushed my legs further apart. First, it was his fingers, finding, feeling, filling. Then it was his tongue, touching, tasting, teasing. Within seconds, I was whimpering, my knees trembling, about to give way, my body quivering, arching towards him as I craved more and more and more, until liquid dynamite was exploding in my veins and I was clutching onto the wall, head thrown back as moan after moan after moan of pleasure gushed out of me.
Very good. That was bloody brilliant.
Amazing.
Well, I'll just give a short one, actually. With a swift economy of movement, Kadir picked off Caitlin's tunic, revealing the modest bra and pants she bought in a discount store in Edinburgh. What are you waiting for, Caitlin? Why don't you take off my clothes? His uneven words were coated with need, and Caitlin trembled beneath their rush of elemental power. She'd never undressed a man before, and she'd certainly never undressed a powerful king of the desert. But there had to be a first time for everything, surely. Her hands were unsteady as they moved towards the hem of his robe, mainly because she could feel the heat of his body beneath the silk and knew what delights awaited her. Pulling the garment over his head, her fingers tightened around its voluminous folds, her breath catching in her throat as she realised that, unlike her, he was completely naked beneath. And it was impossible not to stare at him, to feast her eyes on the broad shoulders and honed chest and gleaming olive skin, the narrow hips and muscular thighs and long, hard legs. But most of all, she couldn't seem to tear her gaze away from the thick pole of his erection, which sprang from between his thighs, pale against the dark forest of hair. She lifted her gaze to his face. He's playing a game with me, she thought, and maybe he wanted her to play it too. Was that what long-parted lovers were supposed to do when they met up again? What if you didn't know the rules of the game, when your only experience of sex had been one short night which had ended so abruptly? "It's okay," she said coolly, the fabric slipping from her fingers to the floor. "Just okay." His black eyes challenged her, and suddenly Caitlin wondered why she was even trying to flirt with someone who was light years ahead of her in terms of sexual experience. More than okay, she admitted truthfully, the words coming out in a rush. "Your body is beautiful." Was it her shaky praise which provoked the sudden tension in his body, which made his eyes narrow before he bent to capture her lips again, searing them with a kiss which felt as if he were branding her with fire? Caitlin didn't know, and somehow it didn't seem important. She just kissed him back as if her life depended on it, because hadn't she dreamt of doing this so many during the long nights she'd spent alone, and then woken up frustrated in the morning to realise it had all been a dream?
Oh, well done. Well done.
I love commercial women's fiction.
Exactly.
And I love a great sex scene. Thank you, ladies. I just think it's brilliant. Well, this is how we liberate readers, liberate women, liberate our genre.
Have people said to you, because I noticed no one has mentioned it at all, COVID-19. People have said to you, are you going to include it in a story? I mean, for me, it's actually a no-brainer, thank God, because I write fantasy. But do you think you'll include it in any of your stories or not?
I don't know. I mean, I'm working on the next one at the moment, but this one, All My Lies Are True, it's set 10 years after the Ice Cream Girls, and it's set in 2020. And so when I finished writing it, November 2019, I had no clue what was coming.
No, well, we didn't.
I had no clue what was coming. So a lot of the book is set in 2020. So we had to change the 2020 bits that we could to say now.
Yeah.
But I had to put a disclaimer at the front of the book because it was too late to go back and rewrite it to include lockdown. They're walking around, they're meeting for coffee, they're having sex, all these things that aren't happening anymore. So I had to put
a disclaimer at the front.
Yes, because to say people, in May, April, June, they're doing all these things. I wrote it before that. I wrote the disclaimer in April, and then Black Lives Matter happened. That's all missing. So I was laughing at myself the other day. I was like, oh, bless you, April 2020, Dorothy. You had no clue.
I really, really, really want to talk about the way in which women's fiction is viewed. Research tells us that men don't read books by women, and yet women read books by everybody. The term women's fiction, women's writer, there is this sense within the industry that all things aren't equal. And I'd love to get a sense from you about how we can change that story and what these things mean to you. People make huge assumptions about what Mills and Boon is and who the reader is. For thrillers, for erotic fiction, for women's fiction, there's this huge assumption about the female reader. And then you have literary fiction, which seems to be something else. How do we change the story and how do you feel about it, ladies?
I write stories that are very much, in women's heads and about how they view their lives and their relationships and just their story, really. And a woman's emotional life, I think, is often quite different to a man's. I mean, you might disagree, and in a way, perhaps it's just better to accept that. I mean, I'm not crazy about books on murder or sort of, because I find my imagination just takes me to a place I can't lose the image from my head. So maybe we should just accept that, women like reading some things more and men like reading some things more, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't know. Is that very radical?
The whole women's fiction, and remember where back in the day it was all chick lit and people, I used to have a problem with the word chick lit and now I don't, because the world seems to spend a lot of time denigrating and downgrading what women like and what women want to read about. And, it's all shoes and handbags. So what?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be anything more than that. Women can be whoever they want. They can like whatever they want. And if somebody wants to spend all their lives worrying about lipstick, worrying about shoes and handbags or reading about that, it's not up to me to tell them that they're any worse off than reading a big political tome. I want to read political tomes sometimes. I like to think I'm intelligent and I can hold a theory in my head as much as the next person, as the next man I'm talking about, because it becomes about people and women. It's like books are books and women's books. And that's because women are constantly being downgraded. Anything we like or do or feel is almost second class. So I think that's where a lot of that comes from. And Mills and Boon became a shorthand for trash. And that's not the case at all. It's really hard. I used to say it to people all the time. It's really hard to write a Mills and Boon's book. You sit there and you kind of sniff about it. But they've got templates and things that you need to make sure you have that make them successful. That's why people buy them all the time, because they are successful for a reason. And that's partly because, again, things that women like or interested in, supposedly, aren't as important as other things. And it's from an early age. You look at school reading lists, there are very few books by women on those school reading lists that boys are forced to read, like girls are forced to read. You've got Lord of the Flies, you've got Shakespeare, all books I really enjoyed.
So what you have had on your reading list at school by a woman or women that you...
Exactly, that's what I mean. There were none. We didn't have that. I didn't have that at all. It was, no. And you didn't get your Maya Angelou or Terry McMillan or Alice Walker.
There's an amazing campaign at the moment, if you've seen, to get Black literature onto the GCSE syllabus.
Yes, but every time, let's not go too much into party politics, but, the education system has been gutted. When boys grow up reading and being taught, unconsciously told, that books written by men are the great literary works that they should look up to, why would they go and read anything by a woman? Because women's stuff doesn't interest them. It's nothing to do with them. It's not intellectual. It's not up there in the high echelons with Lord of the Flies and stuff. Commercial fiction isn't as important, and fiction by women isn't as important, or books by women aren't as important. So, I know somebody sent me a reading list for his daughter's senior school, and it had the Ice Cream Girls on there, and I was really surprised. And it also had noughts and crosses on there. But that's very rare. I never see those things,
That must have been such a thrill.
It was a real surprise, and it was a thrill. And that's why I think in this situation, it starts off young. When you're buying books for your friends' children, grandchildren, buy them books by women. Buy them books that have girls as the main star. Start them early so they actually start thinking that a story about a girl is just as important as a story about a boy. And then hopefully start campaigns to get a better range of books onto the school reading list so that it's second nature, so that boys don't think twice about picking up a book about a girl. I mean, one of the best-selling books of all time is One Day by David Nichols. It's all about emotions. It's all about the emotional life of a man. It's one of the best-selling books of all time.
Because it's a real cross-generational one. My friend's son read it, I remember this, and the bit where something tragic happens in the middle of the book, and he threw the book on the ground kind of like in disgust. And it just was that sense that these things do happen to books. I mean, that's why, in a way, like, the Harry Potter books, like, she confronts real issues, like really heavy issues.
But so many books do that. Also, because we put a woman on the front of the book, a lot of people don't pick them up. Because you put a black woman on the front of the book, a lot of white people won't pick them up. People are we're trained from an early age to only go for the things that are like us. Whereas women, we're socialized to be nice to everybody, to think about everybody else. So we will pick up stuff.
I think one of the things that's really interesting about women is that we read. We've talked a little bit about what you're reading and who started reading by going to the library. We've talked about classics. We've talked about crime. We've talked about thrillers. We've talked about 20th century classics. We've talked about children's books. We're readers. So as women, we're reading across the genres, across the kind of all different types of fiction and non-fiction.
This is a pretty special year, isn't it, really, in so many ways, I think, yeah.
Yeah, lots of things have changed, I think, for a lot of people.
I mean, I really hope we can see fundamental change in our industry. I mean, we know what we need to do, but there have been so many ways in which we've been not allowed to make the changes that we want. So hopefully now we can...
And people haven't wanted to make changes, let's not forget that. It benefits a lot of people for things not to change, so...
Do you think that's because human beings sort of, inherently don't like change and fear change, or do you think it's more pernicious than that, really, that people haven't sort of tried to kind of implement change sooner?
I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that change is needed, and I hope it's coming.
I think change is coming.
I very much hope so too. Change is coming feels like a really neat way for us to end what we started. We started by saying that we want to change the way in which women's fiction is viewed and allow more people to enjoy what we know is brilliant. That moment of opening a new book and escaping into that world. Thank you both very much for joining us. I think our mission was to show that there is a huge amount of entertainment in fiction that can be described as women's fiction or romance, and that actually readers of all shapes and sizes will be able to find something that they like in what we all know is an amazing genre. So thank you so much, Dorothy and Sharon, for joining us. I really, really hope we can get to do this live in person on stage at Primadonna in 2021. That would be amazing.